Hello, a quick note before the stories tonight. I have a very special guest, Dr. Celtic from Dr. Celtic's Playground. There'll be a link below to his channel. I had the pleasure of being on his channel, I think like a month ago now, so I'm really happy to have him here tonight. The first story will be by him, and the second and third story are going to be narrated by myself. They are both by Cesly 1987 on Reddit. I got her permission to read these stories, and she has an entire subreddit devoted to her art and stories, so I'll leave the link to that below. She's a really great writer, and I think you'll enjoy her stuff. Hope you enjoy the stories. As always, leave a comment below and subscribe if you haven't already.
Hello, I'm Dr. Celtic, and welcome to my part of the collaboration with Sonny Lancaster. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and listen. Prison of flesh. I've heard before the brain remains active for 30 seconds after death that our nails and hair keep growing long past you've been under. Maybe we don't die. Not really. At least I sure didn't. There wasn't anything of particularly noteworthy about me. I lived in an average house, was in an average relationship, had an average job. I still remember driving to the office one afternoon, maybe just a little more tired than usual. I filled out some paperwork, replied to some emails. At some point, I think I dozed off on my desk. I woke up in a narrow wooden box, dropping flowers all over the ground as I sat up because they'd been all around me. I remember the way my husband looked at me, his eyes red with tears and wide with shock. Other people scattered around, some stepping back slowly and others screaming. Dear, what's going on? We contacted the hospital. There must have been some sort of mistake, but they said there wasn't. I had no heartbeat, no pulse, no vital signs of any sort. I was dead. But at the same time, I wasn't. They made a series of exams and then a load of phone calls to so many people from so many places until finally someone called back. I'm somewhere in Denmark where they had a couple more cases like mine kept under custody, and from then on my life wasn't normal anymore. I took part in so many tests and examinations I've lost count. Blood tests, urine, spinal fluid, MRI scans, you name it. I don't know how it started. None of us knew. Maybe it was a virus outbreak like happens in so many movies, or some sort of fungus. Maybe it was a mutation of some sort. But maybe we were always like this, and nobody knew until it was too late. At first there wasn't much extremely wrong with us, at least not enough for a stranger on the street to notice. There was just a numbness at the tip of my fingers, and we couldn't keep the food down. But we didn't get hungry either. Then, whatever drugs or medicine they used stopped working. They just didn't flow anymore, I think. Our bodies grew a little colder every day, our movements a little more rigid, our voices a little less clear, like our vocal cords were decaying. I wondered if we were rotten from the inside out. I had video calls with my family every week. When I could no longer speak, I started typing my messages instead. And when I could no longer do that, the nurses called them for me and updated them of how I was doing. Then it was inevitable. We were 5 people sitting in a sterile white room. 5 others stood across from us in hazmat suits. This time there were no padded coffins or fancy flower garlands, and I knew exactly what was going on. The metal shone in their hands, and I wanted to close my eyes for what I hoped would be the last time, but I couldn't do it. I went in with my lids open. "Aim for the head," a voice came through the speakers. They pulled the trigger. The noise was deafening. There was a pain for a second, then my mind went hazy. They laid us down together in a tomb of sealed concrete. I can't turn around, but I can feel someone's hand twitching against mine. I think it's Owen's. He still could move a little better than I did. Here's the thing they don't tell you about death. There isn't a moment a switch gets flipped and darkness becomes nothing, or you see light at the end of a tunnel. There isn't a moment when you meet your long-lost loved ones, or are greeted by a spectral being to guide you to the halls of whatever afterlife you believed in. But there also isn't a moment when you claw out of your grave with a mind free of thoughts and a crave for living flesh. You just continue immobile and stuck in the shell of what was once you. The only hunger that of worms crawling in your guts. I was still there, long past my body's last signs of resistance. I was there when the heat seeped from my skin, and I'm still here as the marrow rots in my bones. The days shift slowly. There's nothing I can do. When nature crawls past the cement to claim me someday, I'll lay still. I'll still be here. I'm afraid I'll remain long past my flesh is gone, when my skull is filled with moss and flowers bloom inside my ribcage. There isn't an end to my story. There isn't revenge or mourning, or a moral to be learned. There is only death, and the silent infinity that awaits after it. Written and attributed to the Shady Pair.
Wow, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Celtic. You rock. Keep up the great work with the channel. And again, after this video, go over to his channel, give him some love, check out his stories. He has a whole bunch up there. On to the next story. Despair's Peak, Part 1. The restless god lies trapped, but not idle, in its sealed-off realm. It writhes and yearns for the day it may again take pleasure in the pain of mortals. To once again play in the blood and bask in the terror only finite creatures can produce. Many worlds it's fed upon, but never satiated. But the world that fought back against its attacks long ago are the ones it wants all the more. It has become an obsession. So it waits and it feels, searching for weaknesses between the borders of our world and itself, hungry and anxious. It salivates at the thought of breaching into our world again. It will be the greatest decadence and pleasure and our darkest days. Desperate, this we must pray to her divine, begging mercy for the return of her light. Of Grand Mage Telamon IV, on the prophecy of the Dark God's return, Second Age. Pitch blackness, pure darkness, a thick void of nothing completely swallowing me up, like a fish in the depths of an ocean. I was crouched low in a ready position, using my right hand to balance by holding onto the wagon's wheel beside me. My legs burned from forcing myself to remain completely still, but pain had become a constant in my life now. I was grateful for the adrenaline burst that would always dampen the ever-present burden of hunger and fatigue. At least it helped a little, but the pain found its way back to me faster and faster each time. It was hot and humid, almost like the swamps of the eastern bog, a good 3-week journey from here. The cold wind stopped when the darkness befell our remote town. The breeze no longer ran its cold tendrils across the barren streets. I grabbed the thin string tied around my neck and pulled out a heavy monocle hanging from it. I held the cold metal up to my eye to look through the green-tinted glass. The magically infused monocle always remained cool to the touch, with a static shock feeling emanating from it. I held it to my eye to see the world around me clearly, yet tinted in bright shades of green. My eyes roamed across the quiet, motionless street. Debris and bloated corpses littered the street, with no wind and the unnaturally heavy darkness that somehow had a dampening effect on the stench coming from the decaying bodies. They could only be smelled once you were almost upon them, or like a meter away. But my dead kinsmen helped me even in death, making good landmarks to navigate through the darkness. There were monsters that accompanied this dark fog. There were twisted figures that were the void itself. Maybe they were the cruel thoughts of the restless god, made and manifested. Humans long ago, in the First Age, had named them Rippers. We always hoped they were just a myth, not actual walking nightmares. The Rippers swarmed the town in the blinding dark. They seemed to only kill for killing's sake. They never ate the people they killed. It was almost like just for fun, instead of survival. It made sense in some twisted way. The restless god must have returned to our realm and brought these hateful things with it. Prophets had long told of the restless one's return by sending nightmares through the veil of reality to infest in the minds of our leaders. Centuries of slowly chipping away at the barrier separating us, chipping away at our very sanity. The restless one birthed itself into our realm like an already dead stillborn abomination, like a newborn giant formed with extra limbs and already rotting from death. But it was alive as a strange creature could be. Now it was free. And this did not bring just more anger and restlessness. How do I know all these things? The nightmare visions sent to all mortals across the realm since the restless ones returned. Actually, there were nightmares for most of the town leading up to the event. I guess it was our omens for being so close to the epicenter of the invasion. One omen would have been terrible enough, but something this perverse, stacked on the misfortune. Dark signs of its arrival showed themselves all over the kingdom of Muldoon. The signs stretched further across the neighboring kingdoms. The wretched god's birth pains were so terrible. I wager they were felt thousands of leagues away on the wild continent. But the other kingdoms didn't have the vast magical communication network like us Muldoonians, so reports of bad omens tapered off dramatically outside of our borders. The misfortune of my town was, like I said, we were the closest to the epicenter of the entity's push into our reality, closest to the cradle of the spoiled god. An entire mountain range protected us from the shockwave of magical energy, but all of the livestock seized up and died. All of the birds fell out of the air, all rodents died in their holes, and our very young just died in their cribs. It was a terrible event to have our town's children instantly killed, but now I see it as a mercy for even the little ones. The innocent children got to go quickly to our divine in their sleep peacefully, or at least quickly. They didn't have to die in the suffering dark, or by the diseased claws of the rippers. The town's guard fell quickly, a group of 16 men on loan from the capital to keep the peace and protect trade routes. Our peacekeepers were more used to using words to settle disputes among merchants, or, to occasionally get drunk into a cell overnight. They were ill-equipped to handle the inky blackness that engulfed the town, rolling down the mountain like a fluid landslide. The confusion of the townspeople quickly turned to pandemonium as the screams began. That's when we realized we were not alone in the dark. Things moved quickly into the blackness. The rippers began to slaughter everyone in the pitch blackness. The first few days are like a blur to me even now, but that's how I remember the beginning of the horror, the beginning of the end. I remember the dark engulfing the town, the adrenaline of fear. My last sight was of silent death spilling down the mountains like a boiling pot overflowing with viscous poison. When the black fog first swept over me, my first few breaths of the miasma burned my eyes and lungs. The taste of metal was on my tongue. The smell of sulfur, something sweet. There was something sweet and rancid. It was decay and corruption. But now I had to shake out the fog from my head and return to the terrible present. I had to embrace the hopeless situation without falling to despair. My magical sight gazing through the monocle finally spotted the rest of my group. Jill, Sophie, Tigrette, and Philip. Tag and Fel were carrying the heavy burlap sacks of animal feed, while Jill led the three of them through the darkness with her own magical monocle. We spotted each other from across the corpse-littered roadway. The general goods store had caught fire early in the supernatural invasion. Somehow the darkness had put out the fire, snuffing it like a heavy blanket thrown over a weak flame. That's why we were back, looting the store, trying to keep from starving. Jill gave me a series of quick hand signals I had recently taught to her. They had scavenged 3 bags of feed. Phil was carrying 2 bags and Tigrette one of them. But they were heavy, and we were all weak. Jill wasn't carrying anything. She was busy leading them, pulling on corded string that she had tied around both of their waists. Before I waved the 3 of them over, I turned to my partner in crime, Cavill, on the side of the road beside me. He blinked wide-eyed in the darkness, one glove hand twisting the ends of his graying mustache, while the other held a death grip on the pommel of his sheathed short sword. I had to remember I could see him clearly through my monocle, but he only saw and felt the oppressive darkness. He was just waiting for a claw or a fang to strike him in the darkness. Because of this, I lightly placed my hand on his shoulder. The light touch didn't stop Cavill from almost jumping out of his boots. He quickly calmed when he realized it was from me. I placed my hand on the flat part of his chest so he could feel my finger placement through his light shirt. I signed the question to him through a series of light thumps, separating the words. Another bag, 40 pounds. Can carry? I finished my signing by holding the hand placement designating a question mark firmly against his chest. I saw his eyes widen. He grimaced in doubt. His old frame shook a little as he prepared his answer. Of course, he answered back that he could carry the load, but I knew the real answer. It's amazing how much we communicate through nonverbal cues, and how much more we think we are concealed in darkness. He was barely standing on 2 feet, starving and aching. He was pushing his late 50s, and his joints and muscles carried the pain of being a veteran soldier for over 30 years. He could collapse under the weight of his light armor and newly added bag of feed. No way he could keep quiet or climb back up into the attic we were hiding in. But his years of being a proud soldier almost assured me that he would take on the task regardless of his disposition. So I signed back to Jill, dropped 3rd bag. Later, I lied and informed Cavill that I was incorrect in my assessment. There wasn't an extra bag of feed. We would be returning to the relative safety of the windmill. Jill quietly led Phil and Tigrette close behind across the road, her magic monocle making it possible to maneuver around the maze of debris and dead bodies. They all moved slow enough for Jill to communicate with them, with sharp tugs and the string fastened both around them. Stealth was key. When I first saw it, I didn't know how to react. I knew what rippers looked like through my monocle. I knew the placement of all the dead townfolk. But as I watched my 3 companions snake around the bloated body of Mr. Dredge the blacksmith, I saw the faintest quiver of motion within the corpse. Normally, that would mean some sort of vermin or carrion feeder had nestled within the body. But in this nightmare world we lived in, the rippers killed everything that wasn't already slaughtered when the restless one reemerged into our reality, sending out a shockwave of death. To my horror, I realized something else. Upon closer inspection of Mr. Dredge's body, I noticed it had somehow moved a couple of feet to the left since I last saw him. I could even see wet smear marks in the dirt where it dragged itself over. My magic monocle could almost detect other magic. It wasn't very good at it, but it still could. My vision bathed in illuminating green, but magic showed up white. That's what I saw rising out of Mr. Dredge's body. 4 bright spider-like legs protruded out of the back of the corpse and hooked into the ground, lifting the stiff, dead body into the air slowly and quietly. Jill and the others were completely unaware of the horror looming behind them. The jaw of Mr. Dredge fell off with a soggy plop onto the dirt. What looked like a large inverted scorpion tail writhed out of the body's mouth. The scorpion tail hung down the body's bloated chest, the tail curling up to point a large stinger at the group. I could see Jill had heard the plop of the jaw falling out of the corpse behind her. She raised her eyebrows and sniffed the air and froze in an alert state. Her 2 companions bumped into her. I had temporarily frozen too. I had never seen a monster like this before. Its spider legs lifting the body up to let its human feet brush toes slightly on the ground. The whole body was rigid from rigor mortis. The body's hands curled to its chest, making fists. Stiff legs swaying like an awkward pendulum of a clock. Still bodily juices. Blood oozed profusely from the open mouth and ripped open guts. A surreal thought came to my mind. Maybe it was my mind trying to make sense out of all of this nonsense. Mr. Dredge's stiff body reminding me of a toy soldier from my childhood. We're always stiff and jointed when brand new. I finally snapped out of my daze when the glowing white spiky tendrils pushed into the man's body's guts, out with another wet impact noise. The many spiked appendages snaked out slowly towards the back of the unaware. Regret. Joe! My voice boomed out, breaking the silence. Everyone jumped in surprise. Run! Run! With my offhand, I quickly dug into my pocket and produced a flare. The phosphorus-filled stick. I quickly pulled off the cap with my teeth and ignited the flame dangerously close to my face. I didn't care. I barely felt the heat. Holding up the flare, I signed to Jill and the others, producing a blinding light in the dark. But the blackness was unnatural and dampened the burning flame with a muted orange glow. Regardless, the flare was still bright enough to signal the unsuspecting trio to cross in the street. Through the monocle, I saw all 3 of them lock eyes on the light and began to hurry towards me. It was against all human instinct to run, unaware in darkness. This made them not fast enough because the Dredge thing shot out a torsal tendril to stab Tigret in the upper back. Tigret let out a cry of pain, but it kept coming. The cry of pain causing all 3 to break out into a full-out run. The need to live finally was overriding the need to see. I dropped the flare as Jill led the other 2 up to me. They almost ran her poor soul over as she braced to stop them. The Dredge monster seemed to be slow. Her divine was still facing us. I grabbed Phil's shoulder and Jill grabbed the tail of my shirt. We all took off together back to the windmill. We tried to go as fast as we could, but we were a couple blocks from our hideout. It was hard going. Cavill lagged beside me, with Tag and Phil huffing as they carried the 40-pound bags of feed. I looked back at Dredge to see it had fallen onto its stomach. It was skittering after us like a centipede. It was considerably faster now. I lowered the monocle and put both hands on Cavill's shoulders to push him in front of me. Even if I pushed him, he still would be fast enough. My mind raced like it had so many times since the birth of the restless one. My mind swirled with anxious thoughts and decisions, and my sleep-deprived and starving brain hallucinated the faces of people alongside us with silver teeth and the rippers lunging towards me out of the colorless backdrop. But like always, I made the desperate choice. Drop the feed bags, it's gaining on us. I expected to hear the thump of the bags hitting the dirt, but I got what I least expected instead.
No, Jack, don't drop the feed. I'll buy you time.
Cavill said as he shrugged free of my grasp of his shoulders and started in the opposite direction towards Dredge.
I'm so tired of running away. I miss my daughter and grandkids.
The old warrior declared. He held out his outstretched hand and fingers. When the tips of them made contact with Jill's dirty clothes, he easily sidestepped around Jill and the other two with grace as they hurried past him in the dark. These were skills long honed from blindfold training to heighten a soldier's situational awareness level. Jill was the only one out there to see what was happening. She reached out for him as the other two pushed her forward. She stifled a cry and pushed ahead. I was glad Jill wouldn't see this, but I felt like I had to watch. I had to witness his sacrifice in the depths of this hell. I saw Dredge's corpse crawl its way up to Cavill, one of its long talons hooking into Cavill's upper knee. Cavill screamed and sliced horizontally instantly. The sword cut through the air harmlessly over the monster. Cavill took this information and countered quickly as more sharp tendrils stabbed into his lower body. He rose the blade high over his head and let out a final death blow, plunging the sword downwards to impale the monster, staking it to the ground. The monster pulled the old soldier down and tore into him. Cavill's screams echoed as I turned to run. Worse yet is when his screams finally choked out and the world fell silent. The group of us made it unaccosted for the rest of our journey. We hurried in silence just like we were in the morning. We made it to the edge of town where the river and the windmill stood. We climbed up the stacked boxes, the side of the building, and opened the wooden panel into the attic. The inside of the attic had a low glow of multiple lanterns and the stuffy smell of multiple unwashed people living in tight quarters together for a long time. We piled up closely to the entrance. There were 8 now. Me, Jill, Phil, Peg, Mama Denise, and her 2 kids, and Harper were sleeping in the corner. All eyes met mine as they counted the 3 of us. No one had to ask what happened to Cavill. They all knew. I think even the sleeping kids knew. By the best we could reckon, it had been a month since a death swept over our small town. The Rippers patrolled the streets and buildings constantly, searching for survivors to kill in the beginning. They also destroyed any cache of food or weapons they came across. There was a deeper intelligence behind the Rippers. They were vicious and animalistic when encountered, but they carried out complicated tasks relentlessly, like soldiers receiving orders. It had to be the malicious influence of the Restless One, speaking to all of them like they were claws at the end of his corrupting grasp. It was Jill that had the idea for the feed bags at the general store. Yes, they were for cows and horses, but they would give the human body what it needed also. They would give us enough strength. It would give us enough strength to try and escape this divine forsaken town, and hopefully leave the darkness to flee to safety at the capital. I knew the thought of making it all the way to the capital was ridiculous. The longer we headed east, the more likely we ran into the army of Rippers that had left the town 2 days ago. It was hundreds of them. Me and Jill had been out scouting the general store, the feed bags that we had now just retrieved. The going was slow because the enemy was everywhere, but we knew how to maneuver from rooftop to closely packed rooftop. And they grew closer together the closer we got to the center of town. From where we had started, the watermill on the outskirts of town, it seemed like the town was suspiciously empty of monsters. But we soon realized that was just the opposite. We didn't see any Rippers on the outskirts because they were all gathering together in the town square. The bright figures of humanoid-shaped demons clustered together in a giant group. The magical vision of the monocle causing them to glow from whatever evil sorcery had created them. So many of them were huddling together, creating a glowing sea, flooding the courtyard. Rippers were rumored to have always existed, even before the Restless One returned. But they are rare and only inhabited places of great tragedy and a history of dark magic. Now there was an army of them, amassing to march east towards the capital. Some said the Rippers were phantoms created by the Restless One, his only way to reach through the dimensions for the living. More scholarly old-timers theorized the Rippers came from vengeful spirits of the long-extinct elves, hunted to extinction by man a millennium ago. Other ancient texts mention the long-extinct legacy elves had a bad habit dabbling in dark magic, causing the Restless One to specifically target them, repeatedly using the elves to innate affinity with magic to breach into our reality and cause havoc. There are many that believe man's genocide against the elves was not entirely warranted. It had helped seal the Restless One away, but not all elves had worshipped the Restless One. Many of the others worshipped her divine like we humans do, but the relations between elves and humans had always been strained, and it was this excuse humans needed to eliminate all their rival for dominance over the lands once and for all. Why must we be punished? I remember Tama asking when all this happened back when she was alive. Tahama said in a fit, "It's our fault. It's the fault of the long-dead ancestors. The kingdom that committed the atrocity doesn't even exist anymore," Tahama said in a fit of nervous mania. We had to hush her for getting too loud, but the truth is no answer. There's no clear reason why we were subject to such anguish. Like I said, Tahama didn't make it anyway. On a supply run, she had grabbed a doll from her home to bring to Mama Denise and the two girls, who had dropped it in the street when Jill spotted a group of Rippers scaling rooftops a block away. We all scrambled to hide, hoping the Ripper patrol moved along. They spotted the doll laying in the dirt, and with some sort of supernatural intelligence, they recognized it wasn't here on their last patrol. They knew that humans were moving around them. The 5 of the Rippers in the patrol circled the doll, all letting out high-pitched squeals like an alarm to the others. Me and Jill hide in a nasty bale of hay next to a gutted horse laying beside it, hopefully masking our smell. Our terror rose as we watched more and more Rippers coming out from the shadows. They slid down buildings, out of doorways, and from under debris. We were all screaming. It was almost deafening to all of us. There were 3 magic monocles during this time. All of us had ones. And we could all see and count the Rippers going into the hundreds. They would find us by flooding every corner of the street. They would come across us eventually. That's when she did it. When Tahama made her decision. I didn't exactly see where she hid, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She broke cover and ran directly in the streets into the crowd of monsters. She tossed her monocle behind her towards our direction, maybe for us to get later. Of course, they glowed brightly through the monocle. But to the naked eye, they were inky black. A blacker than all the surroundings, making it almost impossible to see them. When the Rippers got close to their victim, they allowed the prey to see their shiny silver teeth. The sharp, protruding teeth stand out bright and glistening against the backdrop of darkness. They moved in to kill the hapless human. That's all Tahama saw. She dropped to her knees and searched blindly for the dropped doll. She screamed and cried as the teeth sank into her, tearing her bit by bit of flesh. The Rippers whooped and laughed like hyenas as they snatched piece of her away. From what little I knew, the Rippers didn't need to eat. They just bit her for the jewelfulness of it. Blood-soaked, mostly skinless hands of poor Tahama found the doll that had started all this horror. She hugged it close to her chest and let out a gurgling scream before tipping over, likely dying of the shock. That very second, that truly hard moment, I decided I wasn't gonna die in this town. I wasn't gonna wait it out like all the old-timers at first advised. They were all dead anyway. They didn't really wait it out. The king's armies hadn't made it in time. There were no fireballs from battle mages to shatter this darkness. No royal purple knights led by the heroic prince. No salvation for divine. If we waited, we would die in the dark. No doubt the king was coming with his armies, but how many days or years would it take him to reach our settlement? No, I would not die here. I promised myself this years ago. I would survive like I had always promised. I would save Jill the way she saved me. Then was when the army of Rippers moved out east towards the capital. They still left wicked things behind to kill us. But this was our best chance. As I sat in the darkness of the attic with my mind free to visualize the wonderful, colorful detail of my last memories before the Restless One tainted our town with a sleepless void. As I sat in the darkness of the attic, my mind was free once again to remember and visualize the wonderful, colorful details of my last memories before the Restless One tainted our town with a sightless void. I remember walking through the town, going towards the training academy. I was going to climb the mountain behind it. I was going to climb it again and again until I graduated and become one of the world's and became one of the Royal Warden Squires. That academy started soon, and I never made it to the top without resting, without dropping my pack. That's why I was one of the first to see our oncoming doom. The inky blackness spilled out from across the mountain and flooded down towards the town. I knew I had to run and give warning to the town's guard. I wasn't a Warden Squire yet, but I still felt I had a duty to protect the people. Tears tears heated up and cooled my cheeks as I sat in the dark, grateful that Jill and the others couldn't see me crying, as I remembered all of the death that followed. But one of my last memories gave me the tiniest blink of hope. I remembered the peak of the mountain, stabbing through the blackness. The mountain was tall enough to escape the flood of hell filling the valleys and town around it. There was a ceremonial watchtower at the top of the mountain, and it was filled with supplies. It's where the academy cadets earned their badges and completed their training. The mountain was the last test to becoming a warden squire. It was a grueling, uphill climb. The past cadets liked to boast over their hard-earned accomplishments had given it a nickname. The mountain was affectionately called Mount Despair, but it would be our salvation. Whew! Jeez, Cesly. Pull up my heartstrings there. Oh my god. So Cesly is a type of writer where their writing could be in books, like 400-page novels. Absolutely incredible. The next story is called My Cat Is Not My Cat. It is a complete story. Jet took his place atop my Xbox like he always did. I thought I'd broken him of this in the past. His fluffy, fat body would clog the cooling vents, making my Xbox overheat and shut off. But when he stood atop the struggling console staring back at me with his unblinking feline gaze, any other time, this would just be slightly annoying. But I had a growing suspicion this cat was not my cat. A lot of people say I'm just being paranoid. All cats act this way. They all have a screw loose. They don't know my Jet. I found Jet 4 years ago at the city park. He and his brother had been abandoned. 2 little kittens mewing and shivering in the cold. Of course I couldn't have this. With my mother's permission, I brought both of them back to the house. I had just gotten out of an ugly divorce and was living with my mother until I got back on my feet. I knew my mother had a soft spot for all things fluffy, so it wasn't a big deal to adopt them. She was newly widowed, so we both welcomed more companionship. Jet was pure black, and his brother Spike was a gray tabby. They were named after anime characters by my nerd self. My mom just went with it, or was unaware of it. Spike, like his namesake, he was rambunctious, always getting into trouble. Jet, though, he was always timid and preferred to let his brother explore the world for him. They both grew to be rather large cats. Jet was bigger than his brother, which made me even more comical that Jet was the wimp of the two. I lived with my mother for another 1.5 years. At first, Spike was my favorite. His curious and friendly personality made it impossible not to like him. Jet was the opposite. For 3 months after bringing him home, he would, without fail, freak out and run from me every time I came back from work. He would hide underneath the couch and stare at me like I was a complete stranger. I finally broke him of this annoying behavior. I would fish him out, making him cuddle with me every time he had his freak out and fled from me. Something must have finally flipped in his head and he realized I wasn't going to cook and eat him. But instead of acting like a normal around me, he decided to go full clinger and stand me. Everywhere I went, he had to be with me. Going to the restroom would cause him to meow nonstop while bumping himself against the door. Everywhere I sat required his presence to keep me held down. And his fat self, addicted to cat treats, meowing insistently every time I walked by the kitchen. So long story short, when I moved out to live on my own again, he had to come. Mom believed he would have a nervous breakdown from separation anxiety if I left him. He was my fluffy, needy, tiny panther roommate. My apartment was relatively big for just me and Jet. I went for a 2-bedroom when all I needed was a 1. But if I was going to be living alone again at 30, I wouldn't be cramped up again like I did in my 20s. So the extra room was just an office / yoga / cat jungle gym room. I splurged on the multi-layered cat tree, even though he was rarely on it. He was always on me. But he was strictly an inside cat. when I left him alone a lot when I was at work. I like to believe that he just was used to it when I was gone. I got a 9-to-5 job, getting paid pretty well as a receptionist at a high-end medical clinic. I was beginning to enjoy my financial stability, my new car, being single, and basking in the light at the end of the divorce tunnel. Jet, Netflix, and Xbox were the only thing I needed at the time. But then something terrible happened. I came home from work to find my apartment door wide open. My neighbor from across the hall was standing at her door waiting on me. She was holding her shivering dog in her arms. It was a Shih Tzu, I believe. "Oh, Gloria, I'm glad you're back," she exclaimed dramatically as she swooshed around in her robes to face me, her multiple bracelets and necklaces clattering. "Dear girl, somebody broke into our apartments." I dropped my purse by the doorstep, looking inside, a little dumbstruck on how to proceed. Good thing my neighbor continued her story after her purposeful and dramatic pause. "I called the cops already, dear. They have already been by. They told me you can contact them if you find anything missing." I turned to her, Ella, I think her name was, and asked, "How long ago was this?" About an hour and a half. The cops left about 30 minutes ago. They left me a card with the lead officer's information." I walked in and began looking around. I waited for Ella to follow. She continued, "I was laying down from a headache, waiting for Frank to return from work. Usually I'm at church for choir practice, and Max doesn't get home until after you. But I heard the door begin to rattle like someone was using keys on it." Ella was now in my living room while I did a quick search down the hallway. I hadn't noticed anything missing. Everything seemed to be the cluttered mess I'd left it. I realized Ella had stopped with her story. I rolled my eyes and returned to the living room to give her my apt attention. As if on cue, she continued, "So I put my ear to the wall and listened." Ella pantomimed, putting her ear against the back of her hand. "I knew my Frank wouldn't be coming home this early, and I knew he never carried around so many keys. Then Little Bit started barking." Her eyes widened dramatically as she began petting her dog like it needed counseling. "Little Bit never barks at his daddy like that." Her dog just stared at me and shivered. In my experience with the neighbor dog, he barked at anything and everything. He barked at night, he barked during the day, he barked every time I walked down the hallway. But maybe his bark was different this time. Maybe that's what Ella was trying to express. Different than its normal incessant yapping. I could see Ella was performing another dramatic pause, waiting for me to contribute. "He sounded different, like scared?" I offered. "Yes!" she jumped. "So I grabbed my .45 and racked the slide." Ella moved her robe to the side to show me a large silver handgun sticking out of her pajama pants. This time my eyes widened. Oh, Lord. Ella was packing. I said, "Who's there?" And then I heard the door slam and keys start jingling away. Lil Bit was barking furiously, so I scooped up Bit and opened the door. She performed another pause. "Nobody there, but your door was wide open." I felt so confused and a little violated. I just turned in circles in my living room trying to see if my brain had noticed anything out of place. Wait, where was Jet? So I called the cops. They did go in your apartment to see if anyone was hiding in there. And they contacted the landlady, Rachel, to see if any staff had permission to go into the rooms today. "Jet! Oh no, Jet!" I darted to my couch and looked under it. Nothing. I frantically called his name again, and I ran to my room to check under my bed. He wasn't anywhere. There wasn't a lot of places for him to hide either. I ran back into the hallway in a panic. "Oh, honey, I forgot about your cat," Ella exclaimed. She began looking around her immediate area like Jet could be hiding right under her feet. I felt like I was going to hyperventilate. Who'd want to steal my cat? No, that idea didn't make any sense. Nobody was stealing cats. Somebody just broke in and Jet ran away and to hide like the big wuss he was. But he usually just hid under my bed when frightened. Why did he run out? I felt tears began to swell in my eyes. It was just too much. The violation of my privacy, the thought of a stranger digging through my few remaining belongings. Now my cat was missing. Either stolen or running around the neighborhood. He must be so scared. Before I realized it, Ella was at my side comforting me. She must have seen my breakdown incoming. She led me to sit on the couch as I began to sniffle. I never saw your cat escape, but I wasn't watching the door the whole time. I walked away to get my phone and talked with the cops. We sat and talked for a while. She helped me calm down and come up with a game plan. She let me hold her dog as a consolation. That's when I realized I liked my new neighbor. It's Lori, by the way, I said during the lull in the conversation. Ella looked at me questioningly, and then embarrassment covered her face. Oh my God, dear, I've been calling you the wrong name all this time. I smiled and replied, It's okay. It was never a big deal, so I didn't want to embarrass you. Besides, I thought it was kind of cute, I replied. Ella just laughed and said, I had a sister named Glory. I'm getting old. Please, just answer to both of them for my namesake, please. I handed Ella back her dog and gave her a quick hug. I'll answer to anything that sounds close. Now, I need to search the neighborhood like we talked about. Jack could still be around. After I said goodbye to Ella, I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. It was already close to 8 p.m. I was on the third floor of the complex, but the hallways were open to the outside, with the stairways leading straight into the parking lot, with no walls to separate the outside from the inside. Cool air blew through the hallways, and my feet echoed on cement floor. I made it to the ground floor and called for Jet, looking under and between parked cars for a black cat hiding in the dark. I had been at it for about half an hour when I noticed a maintenance van idling towards the back of the building. I heard the jingle of keys as 2 maintenance men came down the stairs carrying something. 2 more apartments after this. Mistress is making quick progress, more than half already. The conversation stopped as both men saw me. They were carrying a rolled-up carpet between them, but something heavy was clearly weighing it down, slumping in the middle. Both men were gigantic, at least 7 feet tall, over 250 pounds. They were both sweating profusely, their tan uniforms darkened by sweat. What shocked me the most was they both looked the same. Like twins? It had to be. The only difference between them was one small man had a fresh scratch going down his left eye. It was swollen shut. Ma'am, one said as they hurried past me with their heads down. I should have asked them if they'd seen Jet, but something told me not to. They loaded the carpet into the van, all while throwing quick glances at me. Of course, my mind went to the morbid. It looked like they were sneaking a body out wrapped in a carpet. But how cliche could you be? God, maybe I was watching too much Criminal Minds. I retired back to my room shortly after. The whole thing had drained me physically and mentally. Sadness crept back in my head. Sadness crept back in as my head hit the pillow. My poor little guy was all alone out there. I would put up posters tomorrow. A somber sleep overtook me. The next day at work, I printed out flyers with Jet's face plastered all over them. When I got home, I ate a Lunchable and took a quick shower. I figured I would be out for a couple of hours hanging up flyers, questioning neighbors, and I needed to be refreshed for this task ahead. I had my stack of flyers and was grabbing my keys for the counter to head out when I heard a soft knock at the door. When I answered it, I was met by the landlady, Rachel. Rachel was middle-aged, tall, and pale-skinned. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight knot. She had a toothy smile plastered across her face that didn't show in her eyes. The sight of her was uncomfortable as she stood over me. When I opened the door inward, she didn't step back to give me personal space. She just stood inches away from me on the other side of the doorframe. An overwhelming scent of cheap perfume assaulted me. She must have dumped half a bottle on herself. Rachel blinked twice, then addressed me. "Good evening, treasured tenant. I heard you were missing a cat." Her awkward smile still across her face. Yeah. How did you know?" Rachel produced a pet carrier from behind her back and presented it to me. I actually had to step back to not be hit by it. I bent over to look into the dark inside. I saw 2 green feline eyes staring back at me. I quickly fumbled with the cage to let him out. I picked up his fat girth to hold him out in front of me. There were a lot of fat black cats out there, but this one was definitely my Jet. When he was a kitten, he got out of the house at my mom's. He was gone for 3 days before returning scared and dirty. He had a cut on his upper lip that turned into a scar. It made him look like he was giving a humorless smirk. This is one of the reasons why he was an inside cat and was traumatized of going outdoors. "Oh, Jet, it's you!" "Oh, Jet, it is you!" I said as I hugged him. He also smelled funny, like chemicals. Something strong and pungent. No telling what he got into out there. I'd have to wipe him down with a whole box of wet wipes. But as long as I had him back, I didn't care how he smelled. "How did you know he was missing? I don't think you've ever met him before," I asked. Rachel blinked rapidly and froze as the smile fell from her face. She reminded me of an old computer trying to load a heavy program. Her eyes darted around my apartment and finally landed on a stack of papers in my hand. "I saw the flyers," she said. "I saw the flyers," she said. My brow furrowed in confusion. "Are you sure you didn't hear it from Ella?" I offered. "Yes," Rachel replied curtly and nodded. She turned quickly and walked away from me without further word. "Okay, bye, I guess," I said to myself as I watched her go. I closed my door and returned to cuddling my cat. He was quiet and uninterested in me for the rest of the night. I figured he was shaken up. He usually was very talkative. I would say something to him and he would meow back 9 times out of 10. But he wouldn't even sit on me. He just sat on the other side of the couch and stared. Staring directly into my eyes with this unflinching gaze. When I went into the bed, I brought him with me and closed him in my room. I wanted him to know that he was safe now. But he just sat on the edge of my bed and, yes, just stared at me. Except his eyes darted all over my body like he was just scanning me. I fell asleep pretty fast that night. Knowing my cat was safe had a lot to do with it, even if he was a little shaken up. But then I had a nightmare. Well, it was sleep paralysis, actually. I've suffered from it before, but it was never this long or this vivid. I dreamed I was frozen in my bed, barely able to breathe. It felt like 100-pound weights were tied to each of my limbs. My eyesight was blurry, but I knew I was in my room. The door in my room would jiggle, and I could hear the tickle of keys. Tall, dark shadows would step into my room and surround my bed. It was at least 5 or 6 of them. I would begin to hear soft chanting, and my body would get the sensation akin to when one of your limbs is fallen asleep. Then Jet walked up on my legs to stand directly on my chest. He would bend down and look directly into my eyes. Except they weren't green cat eyes, but blue human eyes. They were my eyes. The chanting would grow louder and louder. Jet would put his mouth close to my mouth. I would feel the tickle of his whiskers on my lips. I would begin to panic as I felt my breath leave my lungs. I would try to thrash and get up, but my body would remain frozen. The corners of my vision would fade from a lack of oxygen. I managed to get out one word before falling into darkness. It was a plea to anyone or anything. Help, I croaked breathlessly. My vision faded to black. Right before the dream ended, I heard my voice come from my jet. My voice. Help, it mimicked. Help. When I awoke in the morning, I was still perturbed by my bizarre and suffocating dream. Maybe that's why I began to get paranoid about my cat. As ridiculous as the notion was, I was still very shaken up. Things only got stranger from there. The dream occurred the same every night. Sometimes I could speak, sometimes I couldn't. But the dark figures would return to chant. Jet would sit atop me, stealing my breath. During the day, Jet was completely aloof and stoic. No meowing, no cuddling, not even eating treats, just staring, searching me with his eyes. On the 5th day of bad dreams, I regretted even coming home to him after work. It felt like my friend was gone, only an imposter left in his place. An imposter who used a friend's face to violate my dreams. I delayed coming home to Jet's deadpan stares by going shopping for a few groceries after work. When I was walking to my door, I set down my groceries to fish out my keys. That's when Ella opened her door with a little bit on a leash. We began talking. Ella asked me if I found my cat. She cheered ecstatically when she heard the news that my cat had returned. She then looked at me questioningly when she saw my dour reaction. When she asked me why I seemed sad, I froze. I didn't know what to say, because I didn't really know what was going on myself. She must have seen my indecisive reaction and offered to have me come over for a coffee. I gladly took it. More time out of my apartment. More and more I was beginning to like Ella. Her coffee was strong and taken dark. A neighbor after my own heart. We began chatting and I soon realized Ella was an information broker for the whole apartment complex. Weird stuff's been going on, Chloe, Ella explained over the top of her coffee mug. First the murders, then our apartment's being broken into. I almost choked on my coffee. What murders? How do you not know? Ella asked incredulously. The Washingtons at 111. Maxwell killed his wife and child. Whoa, I replied. I didn't know any appropriate reaction to news like this. They've been here for 20 years. Max is an engineer. His wife, I think, was a teacher. The little boy was, Ella thought, 16 now? Did they say why he did it? Ella scrunched her nose. It was ghastly. In all the papers. He told the police they were imposters. Just came home and freaked out and killed them with his bare hands. They found him in the parking lot covered with blood, waiting for the cops. The poor boy and wife must have fought back because Max was taken to the hospital for a while. I set down my coffee. The morbid talk was making me feel worse. I had been over for about an hour anyways. I had to go home eventually. I told Ella good night, and she invited me to stop back anytime. When I opened my apartment door, Jet was standing on the countertop just staring at me. I took Ella up on her offer to visit for the next couple of days. I have to admit, me and Ella were getting kind of tight. I told her about my divorce, and she told me all about how she met her third husband. Ella had her ear to the ground. You know all the tea going on. She told me another tenant had come home to find their door open and 2 ferrets missing. Ferrets? Who the hell steals ferrets? I asked her if the pet mysteriously reappeared or was brought back by the landlady. Ella told me she would have to find out. We talked about how weird the landlady Rachel was. Ella said Rachel didn't always act weird. She was always quiet and used to live off-site. Now Rachel lived in the apartments with her 2 ogre maintenance men came with her. I told Ella I hadn't been sleeping well. And in the dead of night, I would look out into my window into the parking lot. Those two identical maintenance men were always loading things into the van. Dead body-shaped things. Ella didn't react negatively to my train of thought. She acted like she enjoyed the prospect of a murder mystery. So I thought I could tell her it was really bothering me. I think something's wrong with my cat. There. It felt great to say. It felt so great to unload everything. Ella just looked more intrigued, so I told her everything. How Jet's personality completely flipped, the crazy dreams, the way he watched me. Ella just nodded unjudgmentally and let my crazy flow out. I had all the worries out, and I was out. Do you listen to Coast to Coast? Ella asked flatly. No, what's that? It's a radio broadcast that talks about all the strange things like what's going on here. It talks about UFOs, Bigfoot, purple-eyed shadows, black-eyed children, and doppelgangers. She put emphasis on the last word. Doppelgangers? I repeated. Ella, do you believe this stuff? Ella cocked her head. I would like it to be true, even the bad stuff, even just if 1% is true. It would mean that there's much more to explore, much more to discover. I almost laughed. So you want to believe? I asked. Ella just nodded sincerely, not getting my X-Files reference. I've experienced some unbelievable things in my life, and Frank has a terrifying story about black-eyed children. I'll have to have him tell you when he gets home. Oh no, I said, waving my arms. I don't need to hear that before I go to sleep. We both had a laugh, and I grabbed my purse and stood up. My nonverbal cue, I was needing to go. Ella stood up with me and grabbed my hand with both of hers before I turned to leave. Frank is changing the locks in the apartment tomorrow. Rachel will notice if I change the lock on the front door, but screw her. I want to feel safe in my room. And he's also installing a camera for the inside. She pointed along the roof of the hallway. If someone breaks in, we'll catch them on video. I can get Frank to do the same for you. I told Ella to price the camera and lock for me, and I would think about it. I didn't know if I was fully ready to put the tinfoil hat on just yet, but at least I had options. So I slid into my apartment and fell on my couch. I kicked off my shoes and closed my eyes, but I could feel another set of eyes upon me. I opened mine to see Jet sitting atop my Xbox. So now you know my story, my paranoia, my sleep deprivation. I wondered if I would fall asleep on the couch and if the nightmare would play out right there. I stood up straight, fished around my purse, and pulled out a new collar and a bell made for Jet. I was tired of him sneaking up on me. Maybe I could hear him coming and make me feel a little bit more in control. I slipped the red collar over his head, and he hates it. He shakes his head furiously and paws at it, jingling all the way. Oh, so you do show emotion, I said dryly before turning to my room, like a very responsible and very tired adult. I'm in bed by 9. I fall asleep slowly. I was in the twilight between consciousness and unconsciousness when I hear it. The bell and the collar. It jingles loud, and I hear an impact. The sound of the collar hitting a wall. Oh well, I think. Dummy must have run into a wall. But it sounded like it was thrown. Like it wasn't attached to a fat cat body. Maybe I should go look. Oh, it feels so good to be in my bed. Sleep is about to take me, just barely awake, but not recording anything. Then I hear it, a chilling sound that makes my hair stand on end. A sickly female moan, and it's close. My eyes open and my heart starts pounding. I lay frozen in bed, unwilling to move. Maybe I dreamt it. A dream you swear you hear out loud. I hear the subtle sound of my faux leather couch cushions rubbing against something. Was somebody on my couch? I had to check. Or maybe just run to Ella's. I get up slowly and walk down the hallway. I see Jet's red collar is snapped in half and laying at the end of the hallway. I smell a pungent chemical smell wafting by me. I slowly make the corner and peer into the living room. What I see freezes a scream in my throat. Sitting on my couch is a naked, slim white female with dark hair matted over her hanging head. The woman is slimy, with patches of dark fur matted in blotches all over her body. The woman looks up to stare at me with green eyes, and with my face, she stares at me unblinking. When she finally blinks, her green eyes turn to my blue eyes. I can't believe it. This is crazy. It's a dream. Oh God, please let it be a dream. Where's Jet? And why does this girl look exactly like me? I refuse to think Ella was right. My double stands and looks at me. She absently brushes off the clumps of black cat fur. She stares at me and then looks down at herself, stares at me, then down at herself, comparing my body to hers. What are you? I demand. She looks at me and copies my facial expression, an expression of terror. What are you? She repeats back to me in a low pitch. What are you? She says in a slightly higher voice. She smiles and perfectly parrots back at me. What are you? Nope, that was enough. I turn and run to my door. I reach the doorknob where it begins to turn on its own. I hear keys jingling. It opens and two enormous maintenance men shove me in the back of my apartment. They stand as guardians blocking my exit. Without a word, they part and Rachel strolls between them and into my living room. What's going on? Why are they here? Help me, I beg. Help me, copies my doppelganger. From behind me, Rachel smiles and turns to nod approval at my copy. I begin backing away from all of them towards the corner of my room. I'm glad you have matured so quickly, Lori, Rachel chimes. Thank you, mistress, my copy replies. The copy points to the ground and says excitedly, we can use this carpet. She already has one here. Yes, good, Rachel replies. She turns to her twin giants and says coldly, put her down. One of the men began to slip tight leather gloves on, and the other one pulls a thin wire out of his back pocket. They both begin to stalk towards me, their massive frames blocking any chance of outrunning them. I back up against my window. I turn to look out. Maybe I can jump. I start pulling on the bottom of my window, but it's sealed shut. I see it. I almost half expected it. All of the hope flees from me. The van outside is idling. My hearse is waiting for me. I feel the powerful hands wrap around my neck from behind. The blood flowing to my brain is stopped. At least it will be quick. Before the life leaves me, I hear Rachel. I need you to work fast, Lori. Only the neighbor woman is left. Part 2. Ella's End. Lori didn't come by for our regular coffee and chat for the past 2 days. I was already worried about the young lady, with all the things she told me the last time we talked. Now I was desperately wanting to check on her. I knew when she came home from work, so I positioned myself by the door to listen for her. When I heard her keys jingling, I opened my door with a little bit on the leash. Oh, Glory, how have you been? No response. Lori still had her back to me, fiddling with her keys. Glory? I sang to her. Nothing. Okay, you rude girl. Lori, I shouted. Lori turned to face me with a blank look, then a fake smile spread across her face. Oh, hello, neighbor. She just turned back and slipped into her apartment, closing the door sharply. What the frick? Did I do something to make her mad? Has she gone mad? Maybe it was me going mad. I put a little bit down. I've been having mad thoughts lately about Bit. He'd been acting differently ever since I came home from choir practice yesterday. He wasn't even his normal shaky self. He was just quiet and still. Not even wagging his tail. Oof. Just like Lori's damn cat. I just stared at him and he at me. Everything was rushing through my head. The whole complex was changing, all the way from the landlady to the critters. I considered what I'd told Lori. Doppelgangers. Well, I've got something for you if that's the case, I told Little Bit. I didn't mean a treat. He just sat and stared. Days passed with no contact from Lori. Little Bit was acting strange, recording my every move with his eyes. I didn't have any dreams, though. But 2 Ambiens at night might be the cause of that. It all came to a head a week later. I was taking my afternoon nap when I heard it. The jingle of keys at my bedroom door. I removed my sleep mask and looked at the door. Who's there? I shouted. I knew Frank was at work, and he had the correct key to open the door anyways. There was a long, quiet pause. Then Lori's voice spoke. It's me, Ella. I need to talk. Open the door, please. I desperately started searching for my phone. I bought more time by asking, Why didn't you ring the bell? Oh, I did. Lori gave a fake laugh. You didn't hear? Let's visit like we used to. I found my phone and pulled up the app that showed the feed to my hidden camera. Thank God my Frank was paranoid and tech-savvy. I pulled the feed, showing the hallway from my room. I gasped in terror. Lori stood at my door with a giant ring of keys in her hand. Behind her loomed 2 monstrous maintenance men in their tan uniforms. They were hunched forward like football players, waiting for the snap. Further behind them, I could see Rachel in my living room. I squinted to make out a 5th figure in my apartment. Oh, Lord, no. Oh, Lord, no, I exclaimed. It was me, naked as the day God made me. Peeking over to look down the hallway, I was right. There were changelings, doppelgangers, mimics. Lori quietly knocked and said something else. I didn't hear her. Grief had overtaken me. This means my friend was gone. I opened my drawer and retrieved old Roland, my .45. I slid the slide back and quietly rocked around. I spoke over to cover the telltale sound of metal on metal. I can see you, bitch! You're not Lori. I can see all of you waiting there to pounce on me. The real Lori knew about my camera. Fake Lori looked up at the camera and sighed and continued in a cold voice. We will get in, Ella. The longer it takes, the more painful it will be for you. You and Frank are the last ones. No one here will help you. Oh, God. Frank was still normal. I had to get help for him. I may be lost, but maybe I could save him. If I did enough damage, caused enough commotion. There was a heavy blow at my door. Tweedledee and Tweedledum were pounding on it. They would be through in less than a minute. I canceled the app and dialed 911. I whispered my apartment address 3 times to the dispatcher and hid the phone under the bed. The top of the door caved in and a muscled arm reached through to grab the doorknob at the other end. They will have to clear the bed to get me. I got them stacked up. Mag holds 7 and there's 5 of them. They don't have a weapon though. They're cocky and overconfident. Why would a little old lady be packing heat? Maybe 2 bullets for each of the big guys. Yeah, the math works out. Maybe 1 for each and 3 for Rachel. The door busted open and the goons rushed me. I leveled the gun at the first one's head. Maybe I kill them all. Maybe the gun jams and they get me. They're all on video and the cops will come when they hear the screams regardless. But God, I pray to punish at least one of them. They took my friend, her cat. They might even take my Frank. But this is not the worst of their sins. I scream as I squeeze the trigger. They took my dog! Wow, I really liked reading that story. I really appreciate Cecily giving me the chance to read the story, and I hope I did it justice. If you haven't already, please check out her Reddit, and also please check out Dr. Celtic's channel. It'll be linked in the description. Thank you so much for listening tonight, and I hope to see you guys in another video.